There's always a lot of online discourse when it comes to gaming, but lately there's been a lot of discourse in the FGC, mostly Street Fighter 6, about whether or not the new games are much easier than the old games. Fighting game veteran Chris Tatarian has a podcast called Talking with T, where he interviews pros and veterans inside the FGC and talk about things at a higher level. And in his discussion with Ryan Hart made the hot take that fighting games right now are easier than they were back then. His argument was if you took the top players of Third Strike and put them against average Joes, they would lose all the time.
The quality of games have gotten easier. So now people that weren't even able to touch these guys before are now able to do okay, or be on par, or even win sometimes. Take like a MOV or like a Haitani or someone, play those guys on Street Fighter 6 or Street Fighter 5. You might do all right, you might even win. But play either of those on Street Fighter 3 and you'll get cooked.
Done.
It will be 20-0. The game has given you access to him because the game is easier now. You can tell it's easier now by how many good players there are. Like, everyone's good now.
Yes.
That says everything. Why isn't there a limited playing field to who gets good? Why does everyone get to get good? Because the game's easy. Third Strike, you weren't seeing hordes of people get good because the game was mad hard.
So what's the truth? Are games easier and it's carrying the players so that they can be just as strong as everyone else? Or are the games just as hard as they were in 2009 and old heads will old head? My answer is yes, and also no, but also yes. Kind of no also. I'm going to give you my point of view because I'm in a unique situation. I got into the FGC in 2009 and I was considered an 09er. That was shorthand for new players that don't know how to play fighting games. You see, the old heads even back then were gatekeeping. I can't have a good take and I can't have a point of view on fighting games because I'm new to it. What do I know? So I remember in my scene, me beating some of the older players and them going, if this were Third Strike, you would have lost. That's just the flow of things. It's common. It's going to happen in every game. Street Fighter 3 players are going to be mad at Street Fighter 4 players. Street Fighter 4 players are not going to like Street Fighter 5. Street Fighter 5 players are not going to like Street Fighter 6. And when Street Fighter 7 comes out, Street Fighter 6 players are going to go, man, if this was Street Fighter 6, I would have watched you. It's weird for me because in 2009, I was the new guy. But now in 2024, teaching people on this channel, I have some people that come to me that goes, I was 3 when Street Fighter 4 came out. So I'm considered the old head now. Before I tell you guys how I feel about this, I want to go on a slight rant. So hopefully you will allow me to indulge myself in this hot take rant. Now, you see, there's something in Street Fighter 6 that was really hard to do and took a really high level of execution that's no longer in the game. Why? Because people complained about it, which is hypocritical because when they talk about the good old days, they talk about how hard the execution was in Street Fighter 4. They talk about how hard it was to do combos and one-frame links, and how if a person had really good execution, they could unlock more damage, where the newer players couldn't. There's something I talk a lot about on this channel, something I've done a lot of research on, and I've made a few videos on, and that's parry, and that's drive rush. You see, I made a video about the parry bug, which wouldn't give you parry under certain situations. And I also made a video on how this game doesn't eat your inputs against popular belief. And one point I made in that video was that if you want to get more consistent results when it comes to parry, when it comes to combating drive rush, when it comes to using reversal options, that you need to have better execution and better timing. Because if you had better execution and better timing, all these issues with drive rush, with reversals, they just wouldn't be a thing. And the reason why I ask you for permission to go on a rant is because I'm going to rustle some feathers here. I made those 2 videos and people kept saying things like, Kail, you don't know what you're talking about. Kail, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. But Capcom changed the game specifically in ways that I said that they should change it. Why? Because I understood how the game works and I understand why the mechanics work as they do. And because I understand how these mechanics work, I can talk about it from this position. And you're not gonna like this. The game was working as intended. You just had to get better. Did it feel horrible to not get your inputs at times where you feel like you should have? Absolutely. Did you feel like the game didn't reward you for making the proper play? Absolutely. Did you feel like you didn't have control over your character in times where you feel like you should have? Absolutely. All these things I agree with you on. It did not feel good, and I'm glad that they made those changes. That doesn't change the fact that these mechanics worked exactly as they should. It made sense. And if you liked the video, make sure to like and subscribe to see more content like this. If you wanted to make sure your reversals came out, you had to input them closer to when your opponent was about to hit you. It was a tighter window, much like the tighter window of Street Fighter 4. You're allowed to hold down parry, but if you wanted to get a perfect parry, you had to do it within 2 frames, kind of like Street Fighter 4's one-frame links. Street Fighter 6 required you to be better to use some of these mechanics, And what did everyone do? They complained about it and they told Capcom to change it. Why? Because it was too hard for them to be consistent. Which is ironic because the people who talked about the game being bugged, it wasn't, are saying that Street Fighter 4 required more skill, even though there was unblockable vortex situations, there were pass-through glitches. There were so many bugs in that game. You can't say you miss when fighting games required more skill like in the old days, and then be upset that Street Fighter 6 required higher execution to access mechanics, and then complain about it over and over again on Twitter, even though it was working as intended, and then they lowered the execution barrier. I'm just saying, smells like hypocrisy to me. I'm just saying, I know it's a hot take. I'm glad they changed it, but I'm also not here going, back in my day, it was hard to play these games. So let's move on with the topic. Are fighting games easier today than they were back then? Executionally? Of course they are. Street Fighter 6 ran at 60 frames per second, and to my knowledge, there was no buffer window. If there was, it was very small. So if you wanted to hit a 1-frame link, it required you to hit that perfect frame 1/60th of a second. When I first started playing, it felt impossible to be consistent with 1-frame links. Back then, I played on PlayStation 3, on a HD TV that had a lot of lag. I wasn't using game mode. So of course it felt impossible. I had audio and video lag as well as input lag from my controller. But as I got better, and over time, I got better at 1-frame links. Were they hard to do? Of course. Was there a chance that I could drop it and lose the set? Absolutely. But we also developed techniques like plinking and double tapping to make it a little bit easier, to increase the chances of 1 out of 60 to 2 out of 60. And at that point, kind of just felt like business as usual. Let's compare that to Street Fighter 6. There's really no such thing as a 1-frame link anymore. You see, Street Fighter 5 and Street Fighter 6 both have a buffer window, which means you can input things a little bit early and the game will give it to you frame 1. If a move is +6 and you want to use a 6-frame button, in Street Fighter 4 you had to hit it the perfect frame. That would be a 1-frame link. But in Street Fighter 5, if you input it 3 frames earlier, the game will still give it to you. No such thing as a 1-frame link. You know, people will talk about this like it's a bad thing. I personally don't think it's a bad thing. In this clip, Reinhardt talks about how there was very few top-level players in Street Fighter 3, and how in Street Fighter 6 we have so many players playing at the highest level. Well, there's a few reasons for that. Information is so much easier to acquire than it was in 2009. Today, I could just go to Twitter and just type #SF6_JRI and get jury posts. There's Discords where people can talk about the character and have different threads for different matchups and resources and VOD review. The barrier of entry for content creation is so much lower today, so anyone can drop a video and anyone can share information that they've found. But you should want more people to be able to access the game. You want people to play the game and to buy the game and to enjoy the game. The bigger the game, the more eyes that are on the product. Take a look at Fortnite and Dota. They're massive esports for a reason. They're games that are fun to play and easier to access. But if you want to reach the highest ranks, or if you want to reach the highest levels of competition, you need to be good. Not just good, but great. There isn't this evil boogeyman situation that hides in the woods and feasts upon the pigs and children. Joe Schmo can't just pick up the game and go up against Mena RD and win. It's just not feasible. It doesn't matter how high the mechanics of Street Fighter 6 might raise Joe Schmo, he'll never be raised high enough to be able to touch Mena RD unless he raises himself up. Mathematically, I'm in the top 1% in the world in Street Fighter 6. I consider myself a very good player, but in that top 1%, there is a mountain between me and players like Punk, players like Angry Bird and Big Bird, players like Mena RD. Even though I share that top 1% with these players, there is no mechanic in Street Fighter 6 that will raise me up to be on the same level as someone like Punk. When people talk about mechanics and executional barriers, they forget one thing. Even though the mechanics might bring me up, the really good players know how to deal with it, and they'll stop me from accessing those mechanics. Good players will check drive rush, they'll check drive impact. When their moves get perfect parried and they're on the back foot, they'll know how to deal with those defensive situations. Obviously, the idea that I have access to drive rush and suddenly I'm on the same level as Punk is ridiculous. And I'm not saying that that's what Reinhardt and Chris T are talking about. What they are saying is that I have the same access of tools and mechanics as that of Punk. Do I really have access to those things? There's an analogy I like to use, and I believe I heard it first from Justin Wong. And I believe I heard this on the Wake Up Sure You Can podcast some 14 to 15 years ago. But the idea is that when you play fighting games, it's like you're wielding a sword. You see, if you have good combos and you're able to get the most damage possible, that means you have a sharp sword. And if you know how to use your sword, that means you'll be able to open your opponent up and get more hits. If you open your opponent up and you hit your opponent, but your sword isn't sharp, you'll never cut them. Likewise, if you have a really sharp sword, but you're unable to hit your opponent, you'll do no damage to them. It's good to have a sharp sword, i.e. having good execution, because when you do hit your opponent, you'll be able to cut them deeper. And if you know how to wield your sword, even if your sword isn't sharp, you'll at least be able to get more hits on them. True mastery is when you have a sharp sword and you're able to open your opponent up and get those hits. I bring this up because I think this is a good analogy for the topic at hand. It doesn't matter that everyone has access to sharper swords, because if everyone has a sharp sword, then the important part isn't about how sharp your sword is, it's about how you wield it. The skill has moved away from having excellent execution over to making sure you don't get executed upon. The skill is now being able to navigate the screen to minimize how much damage you take while also pressuring your opponent to be able to take more damage off of them. Every hit, every knockdown counts so much right now. That's where the game is beautiful. That's where the skill showed itself. I know the argument can be made that back then you had to have both execution and knowing how to navigate the screen. I disagree with that, because back then you had to have both. Now, navigating the screen and playing neutral counts for double. And being good at that is not easy. It's not just about combos either. Street Fighter 4 had a lot of tech that was very oppressive. There were situations in Street Fighter 4 that would create checkmate situations, and the better your execution, the more you knew about those situations, the more you could restrict your opponent. If Akuma did sweep on me, he could create a situation that I was forced to block. If I did anything, he would be able to counter it. Was it hard to do? Of course. Option selects were always hard to do. Let's not fool ourselves. Just because it took a lot of execution to do those things doesn't mean we were playing a good game. Better put, we weren't playing a healthy game. Unblockables and option selects and fake cross-ups. That's why Street Fighter 4 and Street Fighter 5 did a really good job at trying to minimize those kind of things. As it pertains to combo execution, let me be clear about something. I'm in another really good position to talk about this, because the mission statement for my channel has been, I want to help new players get good at the game and enjoy the game and hopefully stay in the game for longer. There's so many people that leave comments on my videos and come to my stream and ask me questions about execution. And even though the execution in Street Fighter 6 is not as hard as Street Fighter 4, people are still struggling to execute in Street Fighter 6. One of the big issues that I find in the FGC is that people forget the levels that they're playing at. Reinhardt can be considered one of the gods of the FGC. His power level is so much higher than almost anyone else who plays the game, and he's able to play at this high level in multiple games. I say this as respectfully as I can. What does Reinhardt know about the average player's execution struggles? There are players in Diamond who still come to me and go, Kail, I'm having a problem doing this combo. Can you help me? Hell, there's some people that I VOD review in Masters and I watch their inputs and they're mashing their combos out. That sounds like an indictment of the game, because if people are able to mash and still get their combos, then that game must be very easy. The point that I'm making is that these players are considered average players. And if they're struggling with execution and you're at the very top and you don't think that execution is a barrier anymore, it might not mean that the execution in the game is too easy. It might mean that we're just out of touch with the average player. And I include myself, because if I didn't make content trying to help you guys get better at Street Fighter 6, I might be blind to this too. I get frustrated when someone comes to me and they're going, Kail, I'm stuck in Diamond. How do I get better? It's really frustrating for me to say over and over again, work on your execution, work on your combos, you're leaving damage on the table. It's gotten to the point now when people ask me for help, they specifically say, don't tell me combos, don't tell me execution. And I have to say, that's the thing you need to work on most. Do you think the average player who can't maximize their damage on their combos are going to be able to play at the same level as others? And it sucks to say, I have a lot of respect for Reinhardt. He's probably one of the smartest players in the FGC. I love hearing him talk about fighting games. And to round out my point, I'm going to make a really harsh point. Sorry if people get upset about this. There's a lot of Third Strike players that people don't know about. Do you know why? Third Strike sucks. When Street Fighter 4 came out, Street Fighter 3 heads were all saying Street Fighter 4 is easier than Street Fighter 3. But thank God for Street Fighter 4. Street Fighter 4 legitimately rejuvenated the FGC. With that being said, Street Fighter 4 sucks. And when Street Fighter 5 came out, the people who played Street Fighter 4 all said the same thing. This game's too easy. This game sucks. And you know what? Street Fighter 5 sucked. And the people who played Street Fighter 5 when Street Fighter 6 came out, they said, this game is way too easy. When Street Fighter 7 comes out, Street Fighter 6 players will all say the same thing. Street Fighter 7 is too easy. And the truth of it, Street Fighter 6 is gonna suck. You know what? I have one last point. We need to stop looking at execution as the only thing that makes a good player. In shooters, you can out-mechanic your problems. If you have great aim, sometimes that will carry you through. And there is a level of that in fighting games. There's a lot of matches that I win where I can smother my opponent just because I know my execution is better. But like in shooters, what do you do when you can remove value from your player's execution? I'll give you an example. Shroud is one of the best FPS players in the world. his aim is incredible. Shroud was created in a lab, and his sole purpose is to click heads. But Shroud went to play Overwatch, and even though he has some of the best aim in the world, he only plays at a diamond/masters level. Why? Because his opponents know how to deny the value of his incredible aim. The lore of Desk is that he has incredible execution and is able to make these awesome combo videos. Hell, he does challenges where he's controlling both characters with one hand each and playing at the exact same time. If his execution's so good and he's able to do these incredible things, why doesn't Desk dominate tournaments? Because Desk might have good execution, but he also lacks everything else. The most important part, the game sense of the game. In shooters, people will look at raw aim and they'll be enthralled by it. The same thing applies in Street Fighter 6. Hell, I see it with Jury. Clips will get passed around about incredible Feng Shui engine combos where it lasts for the whole timer and it's 69 hits, but it does no damage. So it's awesome to see that you're doing these awesome combos, but you still did less damage than my 6-button combo. I think the more skillful option is not to do that huge 69 hit combo that didn't get the kill and use all of my resources. Instead of doing 40 moves for one combo, I can get more damage off of a 5-move combo. Personally, I think that's more skillful. Respectfully, we're seeing a lot of the younger players dominate Street Fighter V and Street Fighter 6. But if you really think the top players of Street Fighter 6 couldn't go back to Street Fighter 4 and play at just as high of a level as they were playing back then, I think you're misjudging how good these players actually are. Because there's one thing that makes a top player in Street Fighter 6, and that's consistency. And that ability to be consistent is more important than being able to hit one-frame links. And the actual truth of it is, those players would also still hit those one-frame links. So up until now, I recorded this video at 4 a.m. last night. I got up and had a few more things to say about the topic. While I slept, there was a tweet that went out from Ryan Hart with a few responses, and I want to read this out and give my point of view on it. Ryan says, just to shed some light, back in the day, everyone that had access to a high-level arcade had the opportunity to get knowledge and figure things out. But to be honest, lots of players were lazy to work hard and level up. Nothing to do with people hiding stuff. It's a good point. Allow me to retort. I went to Big 2 a long time ago, and I remember going up against a professional player that I respected and I looked up to. Someone that when I first got into the FGC and watched streams, they were one of the first few players that I saw. Going out to Chinatown, I had access to the knowledge of these players now and could spark up a conversation. So when I lost a set, I turned to them and asked them for advice. I asked, what do you do in this matchup? Their response was, as they rolled up their stick and walked away with their friends, training mode, and then they laughed at me. Maybe they weren't laughing at me, but they laughed about the interaction, which made me feel like they laughed at me. Did that player owe me and they had to respond to my question? Of course not. But the idea that everyone just had access to knowledge because they could go to an offline event and talk to players, it's kind of cap. So I understand exactly what Ryan is saying. However, in my experience, it didn't happen exactly like that. Instead, I became the person that people came to with their questions, and I hope I was able to answer them in a way that helped them. The next response was, sure, lots of people were lazy, but let's be fair. There was a lot less incentive to be any good at a fighting game back then. Yeah, the scene was small. One of the reasons why? Barrier of entry. Street Fighter 6 did a really good job at allowing people to do really flashy things without all the barrier of entry. Ryan then responds by saying, this meant only the truly passionate played. This also meant a lot more hunger actually, a lot more healthy competition, a lot more creativity, and so on. If the pursuit of money makes you play the piano, it is not for the love of the piano, but for the love of money. You know, the person didn't say anything about money. They said incentive. Nobody gets into competitive gaming assuming that they're going to make a lot of money. Most people know that there's not a lot of money in the scene. For me, the incentive to being part of the FGC was the last C in the acronym. The community. I was really excited to be in the same room as people passionate about the same thing as me. The friendships that I made getting into the FGC legitimately probably saved my life. My passion, the thing that made me want to play Street Fighter more and more, was Jury. I always wanted to have my take of this character and play it as much as possible against as many people as I can so I can test it. It's been the same in Street Fighter 4, it's been the same in Street Fighter 5, and it remains to be in Street Fighter 6. And the hope that if I was good, maybe I would have a place to belong. That was my incentive. None of that has anything to do with execution. The last point that I want to make, and hopefully people have gotten to this point to hear this, and it's about the idea that everyone is talking about something or everybody has the same view of something on social media. I've had a YouTube channel for about 15 years, and for the last few years, I've been trying my best to grow this channel. So obviously, we need to talk about the algorithm. But we're not going to talk about the YouTube algorithm. We're going to talk about social media and Twitter. We tend to engage with things that make us feel the most, and the thing that usually makes us feel most intensely is a negative emotion. I don't think Ryan Hart is out here trying to bait for engagement. Absolutely not. Nor do I think Chris T is trying to do this. but the results are still the same. They're making a controversial take, and it's going to make people respond passionately. I'm just saying, be very careful with the takes that you see online. It's very easy for you to think that everyone is talking about it, and it's a super important topic. This topic is not trending. No one is talking about this. If you're watching this video and you got this far, then obviously it's something that's important to you, or it's something that you find interesting. Remember, Twitter is an absolute dumpster fire. It's showing you things that make you feel a certain way, and man, is there a lot of trolling. Just be safe out there. Be good to yourself. Ultimately, everyone's going to share their point of view on this, and no one's views are going to be changed. I think everyone should get their point of view across. That's why I'm making this video. I want my voice to be heard. In the end, I doubt anyone's view on this will change because of my video. I just hope you enjoyed hearing my point of view on this. Play the games that you love, hopefully with your friends. And if a person plays a game and likes a game that you don't like, it's really not that serious. So are games easier today than they were back then? Of course. Does it matter? No. Thanks for watching this video, and if you got this far, thank you for allowing me the space to give you my point of view on this topic. If you liked the video, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. I know the comment section is going to be on fire with this topic, but I ask you, please be respectful. You can disagree, but don't be a jerk about it. On screen, there will be a video of mine that YouTube thinks that you'll like, so hopefully they're correct, and I'll see you in the next video. Have a good one.